Thanks for joining us today. I'm John Shanahan. I'm here today with Senator Dick Sears and Senator Brian Campion, and we're going to take some time and go through some issues that are affecting all of us in the state of Vermont. So I'd like to start by saying thank you and welcome to both Senator Sears and Campion. And if we could start off the first segment, just discussing some of the issues at the top of the list that are affecting us in Vermont today. I guess if we could start with Senator Sears, you just give us like an opening statement. And what's at the top of the list of the most important things?
The most important thing right now is obviously getting through the COVID-19 pandemic and how we do that, given the tough times that so many of our businesses, our individuals, and others are facing, including folks dying here in Vermont and nationwide. It's astounding numbers. And we're lucky here in Bennington County to have great hospital resources, great medical resources, but it also takes, we've been fighting, for example, for the travel and tourism industry down here in Bennington County. They've been hit hard by the pandemic, loss of jobs, loss of income. So it's been difficult, and we've been trying to help them and fighting in the Senate Appropriations Committee to make sure that a good portion of the COVID-19 CARES Act from the federal government is spent to help our economic development and keep our businesses going. Obviously, we need, we down here are about 6% of the state's population. It's important to note that because, you know, I hear comments about, well, everything goes to Chittenden County. Well, Chittenden County has 28% of the state's population. So it takes leadership like Senator Campion and I have offered to make sure that Bennington County gets its share of the funding, gets its share of the notice down here. And I think that's probably the biggest issue that we face in the coming session is how do we move forward from the pandemic once there are vaccines available, once we've tackled this. The state is facing severe shortage of funding, and so we're looking for our federal partners to help us with that. But I worry about our businesses. I worry about our individuals. I mean, what's the impact on kids who have been remotely learning? How do we make sure that there's adequate child care available for those kids so that the parents can go back to work? All of those issues will be faced by the next legislature, and I think the thing that Senator Campion and I have going for us is our experience, is our leadership and effectiveness. As a matter of fact, I was named the 6th most effective state senator in not just Vermont, in the nation. I'm really proud of that. I'm the only one from New England that was so named. So I think it tells you that part of the reason that we're able to do the things we've been able to do down here is the seniority that both Senator Campion and I enjoy. I'm a ranking member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Brian is the vice chair of Finance Committee, which handles all the a major of issues, including insurance. I chair the Judiciary Committee. Brian's vice chair of the Natural Resources Committee. I also serve in a national capacity as an advisory board member of the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Both Brian and I are members of the Eastern Region Conference of State Governments, Council of State Governments Executive Committee. So.
Yeah, no, just to follow up on what Senator Sears mentioned, I think we've worked really hard to get the hazard pay into the appropriations bill that really helps all of our frontline workers. Without a doubt, we've worked incredibly hard to get TIF legislation passed that helps our Putnam project, economic development projects. I also want to say that we've put forward and worked hard for our communications union districts. For those of you that don't know what CUDs are, this is the next step in order to expand broadband throughout the state. And we do still have issues in our county in Wilmington with regard to broadband. And broadband is a huge component to good economic development. The reason people move here, in part, is our beauty, our good education system, but also they need regular access to broadband. And as we're looking at a population uptick throughout the county and throughout the state, people are going to be looking for this kind of access. We also know it's been a big issue as families have had their children at home. We've heard stories, not only around here, but throughout the state, perhaps more up north, where families have had to sit in parking lots in order for their children to access school during the day. That's unconscionable, and we've started this process, and we look forward to continuing to fund the broadband expansion. In fact, one of the things that we worked on in finance was a $17 million, and then appropriations approved it, a $17 million accelerated broadband project. This again is to get these dollars out from the CARES funds, and so that people can access them and so that they can make a difference now on the ground. The other thing I should mention is I think over the years we have developed a very strong and effective relationship with the federal delegation. Senator Leahy, Senator Sanders, and Congressman Welch, they have been there for all of us, for the two of us, as we've reached out to them with problems, with issues, and I think that certainly helps.
Senator Campion, Senator Sears, thank you very much. Our next segment, we're going to go right to the heart of what's affecting all of us immediately, and that's the COVID situation. So when we come back, I'm just going to ask both of you, what have you been facing with that situation and how we've been dealing with it? I know you've both been serving the state now for many years. Senator Sears, you were first elected in 1992. Senator Campion, first in the House in 2010, and then to the Senate in 2014. So when we come back, we're going to ask these guys how we're handling that situation.
Great.
Thank you for joining us. We're here this afternoon speaking with Senator Dick Sears and Senator Brian Campion, discussing some of the issues that are facing our state during this election year. And we have, as an introduction, Senator Dick Sears, who is currently serving as the chair of the Judiciary Committee, and he's a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And Senator Sears was first elected in 1992. And we're here also with Senator Brian Campion, who was first elected to the House in 2010 and then into the Senate in 2014. Senator Campion serves as the vice chair of the Natural Resources and Energy Committee, and he's also on the Finance Committee. In this segment, I'd like to talk with both our senators regarding the COVID issue. Worldwide, nationwide, statewide, but affecting Bennington County just as strongly as everyone else. And if we could start with Senator Campion, maybe.
Sure.
Just how are we handling that situation?
Sure. I continue to be very impressed by the relationship between the legislature and the executive branch as it relates to COVID. I think Vermont has been a model, and I think most people watching this would agree. You certainly have been on the front lines with economic issues, but we have worked incredibly hard, all of us together. This isn't something where one group of people gets to take credit. This has been a real joint effort to keep people safe throughout the state. And you look at our numbers, and you look at leaders like Dr. Levine, who should actually be recognized for his incredible leadership as the Commissioner of Health, giving people the right advice, closing things down when things needed to be closed down, making certain that masks are worn throughout the state. The health component, I think, has been excellent. And we in the legislature have worked hard to complement that work, whether it's through expanding telemedicine, making certain that people don't have to go to the doctor as much as they can to be able to stay at home and access advice from their physician that way. But of course, we've also worked really hard all together on getting dollars to small businesses, making grants available, making certain that our frontline workers have the tools as well as the financial ability to continue to work and to be safe. I've been very impressed by our Appropriations Committee, working closely, which Dick serves on, with our committee, Senate Finance. These are two committees that work closely together on a number of different issues. For those of you who aren't sure, Appropriations actually is the committee that is responsible for the state budget. And when they look to the state budget, they then look to us to look for those funds that they may need. And we sometimes recommend things such as the expansion of broadband and using CARES money for those kinds of projects. And I think that's been a good relationship during this process. So I guess in short, I continue to be impressed by everyone's group effort in this. This has not been in any way, anyone's been doing it on their own. The governor's done a fine job as well. And I don't know, Dick, if you want to add something, maybe even read.
Yeah, picking up on your comment about the governor and his administration, what I found during this pandemic, one of the good things, is that Vermont has tackled this in a partnership, both with our federal delegation, the Scott administration, as well as the legislative, and particularly our delegation down here in Bennington County. There isn't a day go by that we don't get some kind of an update from the administration about the health concerns, about whether or not a person in Bennington County has come down with the COVID. During the Manchester anti-gen tests, it's a good example of how the Scott administration has worked closely with your legislative delegation. We had several meetings with the Commissioner of Health and others, the Secretary of Human Services, to try to dispel some of the misinformation that was out there about the COVID scare in Manchester, which had closed several businesses, had people very concerned about their livelihood as well as their lives. So I can't say enough about how this has really worked to the betterment of all of us. A couple of what I've found is, and it's been difficult because you don't get out and knock on doors, you don't get to talk to folks like we normally would walking down Main Street or wherever, but part of our job has been listening to our friends and neighbors about their experiences and what they're going through, listening to frontline employees, which led us to major funding for hazard pay, which workers are now seeing for frontline employees. I doubt many people know there's over 200 employees in 2 group home settings in Bennington County. One is the Bennington School in Old Bennington and a number of buildings. The other is See All Incorporated, which has about 80 employees. These folks were working in very difficult situations, and I'm glad that they're going to be rewarded with hazard pay. We're also able to reward folks who served us in the grocery lines when we were going to pick up our groceries, people who were standing there taking a chance and risking their health and their family's health. We also listened to business and those leaders, and even yourself, John, who were constantly advocating for how can we best help our businesses. I'd like to read a short thank you note from the head of one of the child care agencies called Let's Grow Kids in Vermont. And she wrote, here are a few highlights of the actions that you took, you being the legislature. More than $50 million in federal COVID funds were allocated since March to support child care through stabilization payments, restart grants, operational relief grants, and temporary school-age child care hubs. The state frontline hazard pay program was expanded to include early childhood educators who worked during the early days of the pandemic during the stay home, stay safe order to care for children of essential workers. The Child Care Financial Assistance Program will see another boost in reimbursement rates and eligibility, keeping up with the state's 5-year design plan. Thank you for your hard work. Families and early childhood educators can see that you recognize that child care is the backbone of our communities, our economy, and investments in child care are investments in Vermont's future in the most fundamental ways. that's the type of email that I think points out some of the things that we did during this COVID. For all of us, it was a learning experience, and anybody who's been on Zoom or Microsoft Team or whatever platform they use realizes what a change that is in terms of legislating, in terms of having committee meetings. The one benefit, though, has been that I've talked to a number of people from Bennington County who are able to participate in committee meetings and other things remotely without having to drive all the way to Montpelier. So hopefully we'll learn from this experience and be able to bring the legislature to Bennington County through this technology, which kind of goes back to something that Brian was talking about, the need for broadband. We've seen the inequities in our school systems where some students are trying to learn remotely and don't have good Wi-Fi service. In some parts of Bennington County, kids have had to go to the library to access any kind of Wi-Fi in order to participate in school remotely. So I think it points to many of the problems that we still have, and as we work through this problem, hopefully we've learned our lessons and we're making progress.
I also want to add just one more piece to all of this in the administration. You know, our new Commissioner of Labor, Mike Harrington, has done a superb job at being on the end of the phone when I know I've needed him, when you've needed him.
Yep.
We have received countless phone calls from people who were struggling initially to get their unemployment benefits. And Mike and his team have done really a bang-up job. There for us, there for our constituents, there for Vermonters, and he and his team really do deserve a shout-out. This has been hard, as Dick said, on all of us, but particularly hard on those that have been laid off, that have trying to feed their families, trying to take care of somebody who's sick, perhaps an elderly parent. And Mike and again, the resources he has provided and just being available to us has, I'll never forget it.
And to both of you and to everybody up in Montpelier, like you mentioned, Senator Sears, I'm on the front line dealing with the businesses and the community as well. And I think the success so far in Vermont, number one, is being known as the safest state in the country, even today. There's been a focused and unified voice coming out of Montpelier addressing all of these issues in communication, and including Mike Harrington as well, is one of the things everyone's excelled in the most. Everybody who's representing Bennington has been there answering all of our questions, and every single person who's been picking up that phone in Montpelier are very well informed and very concerned. And I can speak personally how many emails I've sent to you guys and get instant responses. And it makes a big difference in the decision-making process and getting the information out.
And we still have a ways to go. I mean, I think we all recognize that. It's, you know, these care funds have been a big help, but
Yeah.
as we know, our tourism industry is going to continue to need us in the years to come because the recovery is going to be slow. But keeping people safe, getting them and working for them as hard as we can to make certain that they have the resources available will certainly make a big difference.
Yeah, and I want to mention just Senator Leahy's role in all this. As a member of the United States Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Leahy saw to it that there was a small state minimum, which resulted in Vermont getting $1.25 billion in Corona Act relief funds or CARES Act funds. We would have gotten about 500,000 otherwise.
Yeah.
And that's the type of thing that seniority brings. And just as we, because of our leadership ability, were able to bring dollars back here to Bennington County, Senator Leahy was able to bring more dollars to Vermont. Now I know they're federal taxpayer dollars, et cetera, but Vermonters pay much more than somebody in Mississippi in federal taxes, for example. So I think I would argue that without that, we would have been in real trouble. And we put over $300 million into business relief efforts out of that 1.25 billion, and many other places, hazard pay, et cetera, that we just talked about. But I think it's important to note that this COVID-19 epidemic has brought out the best in many people. And so the Scott administration, our federal delegation, and our local delegation all deserve a lot of credit for what's happened.
Agreed. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for both those answers. And thanks for the work we know you're going to continue to do as we're
Thank
working
you.
through
Too.
this.
So.
You've been very helpful.
Next, let's talk about some other issues. I guess one that Senator Campion brought up and Senator Sears did as well, economic development. As we're trying to climb out of this, let's look backwards and then maybe forwards too. We're here today with Senator Dick Sears, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and Senator Brian Campion, who serves as vice chair of the Natural Resources and Energy Committee and the Finance Committee. Senators, let's get to the next subject, economic development. If we start with Senator Campion, bring us up to date on what's been going on up there and
Sure.
maybe some looking forward to what we
Yeah.
can expect.
You know, economic development is interesting. It really is, when you look at economic development issues, it's a package. I mean, what is it that people need? What does a community need? What does a state need to be successful? And for me, right now, without a doubt, broadband is a huge component of that. And that's something that both of us have worked hard toward to expand. I mean, broadband is essential if you're going to move here and start a business, or if you're going to work from home and have your office remote. The other pieces that I think people don't always think about are a clean environment. People come to this state for its beauty. We look at the very laws such as the billboard law that didn't allow billboards to continue in the state. We look at even, I would say, Act 250, which works hard to keep our downtowns tight and prevent sprawl. These are reasons why people come here. These are reasons why tourists come here. This is why people come and live here. The other thing that we've been working hard toward is making certain that our education system is the best it possibly can be. And that means working with our local school districts, working to make certain that as best we possibly can, our state institutions and the University of Vermont receive the funding that they need, and that our technical institutions receive the funding that they need. We're seeing more and more a need for technical skills, and to continue to work with our technical schools to make certain that people graduate with those schools, it's essential. The other thing that we've worked hard on with regard to economic development is making certain that the programs like the Putnam Project can actually happen. I know Dick agrees, the people that have taken the lead on the Putnam Project have really done incredible work. And this, for me, is a transformative program, not only for this town of Bennington, but for the entire county. I mean, we know that people are going to benefit from that project that live in different parts of our Senate district, whether they might live in Shaftesbury, come down from Manchester, maybe live in Wilmington and work in a new position that the Putnam Project might be opening up. They might be buying an apartment there. And we've worked hard to make certain that tax incremental financing can be used in the development of that Putnam Project, because actually getting it off the ground, you need investment. You need a lot of money. And some of that money has come from very generous folks in our community, but it also needs this financing program. So I really do see economic development as a package of education, a clean environment, things like the TIF program, certainly broadband. And I know Dick's going to talk a little bit about the essential piece of clean water as it relates to economic development.
Well, yeah, I think Vermont has been fortunate that we've had an effort to provide clean water to our constituents. But we were confronted a few years ago by the contamination of many Bennington County wells, particularly in Bennington and North Bennington, presumably from the ChemFab plant that had operated for years here in Bennington. And it's a good example of a company that we welcomed here to bring jobs and economic development, but it also brought pollution. And the contamination of our water lines, our drinking water, required action by the state to try to negotiate, and a lot of pressure by your local delegation, particularly myself and Senator Campion, to try to work constantly with the Agency of Natural Resources, the Attorney General's office, and others to get St. Gobain, who eventually took over ChemFab, to provide us with funds. And what we were able to do was to secure a settlement that did provide for water from Bennington and North Bennington to most of the affected wells in Bennington, in the area. There's a few where we will be doing new well drilling in order to provide them with clean drinking water. But it was a real experience, but I think it pointed to the need to deal with these situations in different ways. And we were able to pass a number of bills that had to do with chemicals of concern that are in everyday products. Who knew that Teflon, that the sheets that ChemFab made, had that kind of contamination with them? It's important to note that ChemFab left Vermont, went to Merrimack, New Hampshire, presumably because of our environmental laws were too stringent for them. The same contamination that we had here exists in Merrimack, New Hampshire now. They're still trying to deal with that. New York is still trying to deal with it. So Vermont was able to handle that and get clean drinking water to our constituents. One of my disappointments, we've twice passed in the Senate a bill that would hold polluters accountable for their role in contaminating people's drinking water and other contamination. The bill would provide medical monitoring for folks. Now, if you think about somebody who has and their family members drank this water that was contaminated for, say, 20 years, their exposure to cancer is much higher than the average population. We know that. So all we were asking for was medical monitoring paid by the company, held accountable for that pollution. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that bill. If Senator Campion and I are reelected, I can promise you that we'll be reintroducing that bill to hold polluters accountable for what happens. We talked a little bit about economic development and the connection with broadband, and I wanted to mention Winhall specifically, where we've had an influx of folks from Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York moving to homes in the Winhall area, so much so that it's impacted the school population up there very much. There was actually a national article about it this week. And it's going to take broadband to keep those folks here. We want young professionals in Vermont. We want to bring these folks who can work remotely and may work in New York City and are able to travel back and forth to New York on an occasional basis. So in order to keep those people here, we're going to have to provide them with those services, and also with medical services and other services. So economic development involves so much more than what we would typically think of. And I'm proud of the work we've done, particularly the TIF. I mean, there was a lot of individual conversations with House members of the Ways and Means Committee between myself and Senator Campion, convincing them that we needed to increase the number of TIFs to make the Putnam project a reality. And we were able to do that. And I remember when I have worked with the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee for years, and we serve on the Joint Fiscal Committee together. And I remember one night, this obviously before COVID, when we could talk in the chamber, and she said, "Don't worry, you'll get your TIF. We're just talking." So I felt very relieved once we continued that conversation.
In being downtown, I was watching the TIF project, the TIF process all along, and everyone's like how risky it is and how much there is to lose. Bennington really could be the poster child for the success of TIF in our very first project, and not just in saving a historic, iconic building, multiple buildings in Bennington, but the surrounding properties around it. The moment it was even went public, everything was being scooped up, being sold, being renovated. It should be something you guys are very proud of. I know it was a fight all the way through.
Well, I think the whole community should be proud of it. It was a community-wide effort.
Absolutely.
But I have to smile a little bit. We have a lot of folks in Montpelier who are against tax incremental financing districts. And one of them is our auditor of accounts. And it's been disappointing, frankly, to see some of the efforts to suggest that these aren't a good thing. Why I think they're a good thing is if you take nothing and if we just let that building go and nothing changed there, your tax base, your downtown goes with it. And I think this is going to bring back Bennington's downtown in a major way. It'll also bring offices and housing downtown where it's necessary. And I want to say just another word about something, and we obviously had the help of the Transportation Committee and others, but getting bus service to both Rensselaer and Albany Airport has been huge. And as we get back back to the pre-COVID world where people are actually traveling, our proximity to New York City and the ability to get there by train from Rensselaer, New York, is going to be a huge piece of economic development for us. And I'm so thankful we are able to get that bus line, hopefully eventually get a train line right to Bennington. But until that time, at least people can get that public transportation over to the Albany Airport and to Rensselaer. I think it's going to be an important economic development measure.
That was huge, and that was also a great move on your part. And I think it's a disservice even calling it a bus service. It's actually Amtrak service.
It is Amtrak,
It is
right? You can
Amtrak.
book your ticket, and it's I've heard prior to COVID, it's been packed. You get all sorts of folks that are either coming up here to visit the area, or you're getting Bennington College students, or you're getting people that do commute to New York City and they need to get to Albany Rensselaer, and you can just book your ticket right online. And I think Dick brings up a good point. All of these things are components to a good, successful economic development program, and it's not what I think sometimes people always think of, which is putting money in one spot, not putting it in the other, but it really is a package.
Yeah, I want to, building on that, the travel and tourism budget in Vermont has been traditionally small and could use an influx of funds. But one of the things that I've been fighting in the Senate Appropriations Committee for years is trying to coordinate that travel and tourism money with our local chambers of commerce. We've gotten grants each year for the Shire's chamber to bring money here. But statewide, the focus is often on Boston, for example.
Yeah.
And most of our folks are coming from New York and Connecticut and New Jersey. So if you're going to focus your travel and tourism dollars for advertising, et cetera, to benefit this part of the state, we need to be focused on that. And I've been fighting for that for years, and have been somewhat successful in convincing the travel and tourism folks that you need to focus on other parts of the Northeast, not just Boston. And it's worked, and I will continue to fight for that if reelected, because it's an important component.
It really is, and I think, Benny, you have been the only successful one in the state for getting money still coming to the shires where
Yeah.
other regions haven't.
Yeah, we're the only one, and that's a yearly fight with the House. They,
But it's an excellent point. Our tourist market is not Windham County's tourist market.
Right.
They are
Right,
Boston. We
right,
are New York.
right.
We're not Montreal.
right.
So state promotions usually don't focus
Right.
on our target market.
Yeah.
And getting that money has been critical to our local regional marketing and our local Chamber of Commerce.
Right.
I also mentioned just one final thing about clean water. Again, I do want to applaud the legislature's efforts, but I also want to applaud both administrations, both the Shumlin administration and the Scott administration were so responsive, and it continues to impress me how, when you're seeing so much divisiveness and division in Washington, D.C., how folks from different parties really do have historically been successful working together and continue to work together well in Vermont. And the other thing I want to mention about clean water is what we did this year, last year actually. Several of us saw the Lead in Schools report that came back. I led a small group of people and was the lead sponsor on a bill that made certain that all of our schools get tested for lead. And as people have probably followed, there is still in this state lead in the drinking waters, old pipes in schools. And so I think the requiring all of our schools to be tested, finding out where the lead problems are and making certain that those start to get remediated is, as you can imagine, really essential for the health of a young person, who's growing up, making certain that they're not drinking, some kind of water that might have lead in it. We've also, again, the administration has been very helpful and supportive along those kinds of lines, not fighting us in any way with regard to making certain that all Vermonters have safe, clean drinking water, whether they're in their elementary school or at their house. It is really a basic human right, and we as this Green Mountain state really need to continue our way to lead the way in those kinds of environmental and I would say even consumer protection issues.
Sure.
So,
All right, gentlemen.
Great.
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Glad you're staying with us, everybody, and hope you're enjoying hearing a lot about what they've been up to in the last couple of years and what we're looking forward to. In the next segment, we're going to look forward to some of the historic legislation that's been taking place. Well, it's an election year, 2020, and it's basically a whole new world, and I think it's probably never been more important to have some experience and some leadership strength and seniority. And with that, I'm going to reintroduce you to our guests today, our Senator Dick Sears and Senator Brian Campion. And there we have our example of experience and seniority. We've talked a lot about a lot of subjects today, all of them important. But looking to your roles up in Montpelier, can you each address some of the historic legislation that has come out of your committees, your houses, and tell us what's going on and what do you think or feel are some of the most important legislative actions that have come out of Montpelier?
Sure, I'm happy to start. I think Senator Sears has been involved during his time in a number of different historic pieces of legislation, but a few that have come out over the past couple of years really have been in response, I'd say, and I think Dick would agree, to the Trump administration's positions on certain things, the fear of the Trump administration's position on certain things. One of which has been women's reproductive rights, a woman's right to choose, and many Vermonters have been concerned that the federal administration would start to put restrictions on a woman's right to choose. And we passed into statute this year, and Senator Sears will talk a little bit about a constitutional amendment that's coming up to make certain that a woman does have the right to choose and has the necessary, and all people have the necessary reproductive rights that they deserve. The other thing that many Vermonters, and I think many Americans, have been concerned about is the administration's position on the environment. I think more than just the majority, but most Americans agree that we are in a climate crisis, and how are we as a small state to deal with this, to play our part, if you will. And so one of the things that was passed this year was the Global Warming Solutions Act. And what we need to do, what of course all states need to do and countries, is to reduce our percentage of fossil fuel use. So what this bill does in its simplest form is creates a task force to start to come up with ideas and legislation that the legislature can start to pass and address this huge issue. I also would argue that the Global Warming Solutions Act is an economic development bill. We have, during the Shumlin administration, we started to see a lot of jobs in this field around renewable energy. And we know that people are moving in this direction more and more. So again, I think the combination of protecting a woman's right to choose, as well as moving toward making certain that we can play our part in protecting the environment and protecting it for future generations with the Global Warming Solutions Act, are two bills that certainly jump out for me in terms of historic legislation. Perhaps we're not the first. We know other states have moved toward Global Warming Solutions Acts and enshrining, making certain a woman has the right to choose. But these were important steps for Vermont.
No, I would agree with Senator Campion that those were important steps. Over the years, we're forced to vote on a number of controversial issues. You can't shy away from them. And how you vote on them is often an issue that comes up in a campaign, and that's part of the process where you need to defend your record. But I also think that we've had more than our share of those controversies. I mean, I was, as chair of Judiciary Committee, had to deal with the Civil Unions Bill in 2000 and eventually gay marriage. I think those were historic bills that we probably won't repeat in a civil rights manner, but we're now faced with a lot of civil rights issues, particularly the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the responses to abuse. And I was amazed to find that 4 times more people of color and indigenous people are arrested for marijuana charges in Vermont than white folks. That's an amazing number, 4 times more likely to be stopped. It does lead us to look at many of our policing policies and how we deal with how the police deals with the public. And Bennington is going through that process right now, and I applaud Bennington and the leadership for doing that. We passed 2 bills that S-219, which is a use of force bill, requires body cameras, requires data tracking and S-119 that is a more specific to use of force bills. These bills don't strip the police of their powers. These bills require us to consider the totality of the situation and what is the threat of that person. For example, if a person is if a person cashes a $20 counterfeit bill, should that result in a death? in an arrest, as we saw in Minnesota. Is the and the laws require us to be proportional, whatever response we have to the threat that's in front of us. Some would try to suggest that these strip the police of their powers, and nothing further from the truth. It's appropriate for the legislature to step in and try to deal with these things. We also passed cannabis legislation this year. It was the first conference committee that I'm aware of that was dealt with remotely, and that made it more difficult. I was the chair of the Senate side, and John Gannon from Wilmington was the chair of the House side, and we worked through a lot of things. And it's a start. It's not a perfect bill, but it will provide jobs here in Bennington County. It will provide competition with Williamstown, Mass., where reportedly 20% of the customers are folks who come from Vermont. So eventually it's going to take time for this to get up and running, but it will create jobs. It will provide for a regulated market where a person will know what they're buying when they go into the store to buy it. It'll provide jobs in the cultivation and processing and obviously in retail. I, again, will be the first to say it's not a perfect bill, but it's an important bill. 6% of the sales, there's a 6% sales tax would be charged. All of that money goes to after-school programs and summer programs, particularly in underserved areas, which would include Bennington County, which would include places like Wilmington and some Reedsboro, Stamford, and other parts of our district. Another 30% of the 14% excise tax will go to substance misuse and prevention programs, something that's sorely needed, more funding for it. So I think it's a bill. We're hopeful the governor will sign it. Another bill that we continue to look at are laws regarding firearms, and I'm proud that I worked with local officials and folks at Southwest Vermont Medical Center in what's called the red flag law or extreme risk protection orders. We passed that in 2018. It was signed by the governor. We actually passed a firearm bill with 180 to 0 roll call votes in both chambers. That's just unheard of in Vermont, and that was historic. We've done other things. If I look at the constitutional amendment that Vermonters will be voting on in the next few years, this will give Vermont an opportunity to enshrine within our Constitution reproductive rights. And it's particularly important that we have this opportunity. It'll be up to the voters whether it becomes part of our Constitution or not, but I think it's important given the direction of the United States Supreme Court and the possibility that the decisions will come back to the states on whether to allow abortions. And those, so I think that's was historic as well. Vermonters will have the opportunity to vote on what they want to do, and I think that's important. One of the most serious crimes in Vermont is domestic violence. And we have made efforts through a number of provisions to try to deal with that and provide victims with more safety. I'm proud that I was recognized by PAVE, the Project Against Violent Encounters here in Bennington, for the achievements we've made in dealing with domestic violence in the legislature. So I just mentioned that as one of the things that we continue to do, is to look out for the victims and to do our best to protect folks.
Senator Campion, Senator Sears, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, the process of enacting any new legislation starts somewhere. So I guess we could get into the whole process of where does it even begin, but I would imagine a big part of it is hearing from the voters.
Absolutely. I think we both have had great relationships with our constituents, and they're able to access us and reach us, not as much over a cup of coffee as we could prior to COVID, but certainly through email and phone. And that is where a lot of our ideas are generated, without a doubt. And it goes back to what we were saying in the beginning, and it might be a great way to close, that it's a partnership. It's a partnership between, with our constituents, with the federal delegation, with the administration, and I think that has been one of our greatest strengths, is working across the aisles, responding to our constituents' needs, as well as working with the governor's office and our federal delegation.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So getting a hold of you, closing note, email? Best way to
Email
get
is
a hold of
Email
us?
is best.
Yeah.
It really works. It's easier to respond to and have, if it's a question for example, with the Department of Labor, we can send your information right to the Department of Labor. They can respond immediately to both, to you and to us, to let us know how they're dealing with it. Had a question the other day from someone about the Secretary of State's office, sending an email to the Secretary of State's office and then having them respond directly to the constituent to answer the question is so much easier than I getting on the phone trying to get a hold of them and so forth and so on. So,
Well, thanks, John, for doing this.
Thank you guys very much.
Yeah.
Senator Campion, Senator Sears.
thank you,
Stay in
John.
touch with
Thanks
them.
to the listeners and thanks to Cat TV.